everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Justin Corman, and I am a first-year MBA candidate here at MIT Sloan. It is my pleasure to introduce our next panel, Disruptive Leadership, Using Culture, Data, and Technology to Drive Change in Sports. Our panelists today are Tim Armstrong, founder and chief executive officer of Flowcode, Larissa Horton, CEO of SumerSports, and Michael Ibarra, CEO of PrizePicks. Our panel will be moderated by Dr. Alison Fragale from the University of North Carolina. The panel will run for 40 minutes, and we will leave about 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please submit all questions via the Cadence app. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Alison.
Afternoon. Well, I am so excited to chat with all three of you and find all of these points of connection. And as one beginning point, right, you all have deep experience in the tech industry and are now working in sports. And so as you think about those industries, same question to all of you. We can start with Tim. What's something that surprised you or might surprise the audience that you might think would be similar in these industries, but in fact is quite different, or you might think would be really different, and in fact, it's exactly the same?
Well, it's great to be here. I'm from Boston, so nice to be back in the hometown. I'd say probably I started my career at Paul Allen's company, Starwave, and we launched NBA.com, ESPN.com, NFL.com, NASCAR.com, and back in those days, essentially data technology, we were kind of the only company in that space doing what we were doing. And so when you would travel around to meet with leagues or teams or anyone in sports, basically, it was sort of like, what's the internet? It was at that stage. And I think if you kind of fast forward to today, the really big difference is there's a monetization machine behind it with things like sports betting and all the statistics around players and how you draft people and change things. So in my experience, it went from basically an industry that had an incredible amount of consumer adoption and no technology to today, where, in my opinion, is the technology and even things like private equity have so not overcorrected because there's a lot more room to grow, but the change has been monumental. And I think one of the things that's most impressive when you go to visit teams or leagues or even sponsors, they have so much. So the data is so good that they have, and it's getting better and better and better. And then on the fan side, the fan has a lot more data also. So I think it's a perfect combination of fandom, which is incredible, mixing with the fact that everyone has gotten tech-enabled. And I think it's just starting. I think it's probably like the first inning of that. If you go forward 10 years from now, I think it's going to be really remarkable to see what happens in sports.
So I came from Microsoft, and I was fortunate enough to work on a wide range of technologies. I think we started doing computer vision in like 2013 with the Xbox, and got to do a lot in the NLP space, machine learning space. And a lot of that technology, I mean, some of it we're just seeing now or in the last couple of years with things like ChatGPT. I think for me, the surprise was there was a ton more technology we can leverage for these clubs, for these colleges, for the athlete, and for coaching, GMs, and it's not all there yet. I think there's so much that the teams have already done. What was a surprise was the cadence is really, really hard to work in, right? So when we go and talk to a team, and every week they're chasing the next game, and every week they're trying to figure out the changes they need to make, potential personnel changes or play calling changes, there's just so much pressure each week that I think sometimes it's harder to get to these more, I would say, research and insights that take years to develop. So we've been looking at how do we apply the industry technology that we've now had for over a decade into all of these problem spaces where we're not a team and we don't have the pressure every week to win a certain number of games. And how do we work with the clubs, with the colleges, to arm them with more information using that latest tech, whether it's on the LLM side, which makes it very easy to do research and very easy to do comparisons, all the way to understanding, as you've mentioned, there's a wide range of data, from tracking data to all the analytics that we see from like basic box scores. How does all of that come together, and how do you develop these deep learning models that can actually account for everything happening at once? One of the things we looked at is models that can handle 1 or 2 variables versus all 22 at the same time, right? Like it's very hard, and it's a pretty large investment as well in terms of time and resources. And so that's been pretty exciting. but definitely a little surprising because we all watch football, we all love football, and yet we're like, wait, there's all this technology you could be using, and we haven't managed to apply it everywhere.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, it's great to be here. I'll take a little different approach on a difference that I see. I spent 20 years at Xbox at Microsoft and the last 7 at Blizzard Entertainment, and now happy to be here at PrizePicks. And one of the things when you create video games is the creativity, and a lot of technology drives creativity, but you're creating different worlds for people. And the creativity you have to have and the innovation you have to have when you bring games to market in there is remarkable. And that's a huge difference in opportunity, I think, in the space we see today. Sports is a very passive, you sit in front of the TV, you root for your team, you enjoy those successes, and to your point, the fandom is there. But it's our responsibility, I think, to take that even further through innovating in the products that we make, innovating in how people engage with that content. And so it's somewhat similar to video games in terms of the innovation and creativity that can be derived out of sports in general. And that's something that I think is a huge opportunity for us and the industry needs to embrace.
Absolutely. So the first part of the title of this panel is Disruptive Leadership, which can mean different things. But as you think about moving across industries and all this experience, a lot of times when we bring knowledge from one industry into another, we can do it in a disruptive way, in a positive way to drive change. But I'm also curious about the leadership piece, which is how do you, in your roles, balance being a learner, especially Larissa and Mike, you've been in your roles relatively short period of time, being a learner with also being a leader and being able to be in that, this is new, I want to receive, but I also have this organization to found to lead. How do you think about it? I know you've written about this, Larissa, you want to maybe start?
Sure. I think one of the things that was great at Microsoft, and we were actually discussing this yesterday, is in my time there, I was there for 13 years, you kind of got to work for a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries. And so you learn the skill of applying, whether it's a technology or your experience in a different domain. When you build a platform like Azure or Power BI, you're serving customers in every single industry, and you have to learn retail versus, I would say manufacturing or, all of these industries like government and healthcare. Each of them have their own rules, and you definitely have to apply there. And one of the things that I've found really helpful is know what you know and know what you don't know, and go and seek that knowledge from the people who are experts. So we're very fortunate. We have roughly 15 people who came from the NFL, ex-GMs, scouts, coaches, and I am listening to those guys all day, every day to understand how did you make this decision? What is it that you had to do? A trade comes in after a game, what are you thinking about? Who are you calling? And sometimes it's capping contracts, sometimes it's a scout, sometimes it's the analytics people. And as we listen to the problems that they're trying to solve, then it's a much better way, I think, to apply the understanding of the game, the industry, the problem with technology and the kinds of ways that we lead to kind of bring that change in. Technology has existed a lot earlier typically than when consumers actually use it. And that adoption curve is one of the hardest things to crack. In the NFL in particular, these are the best of the best. You can't tell them they don't know what they're doing because they do. But how do we help them? How do you help the elite people leverage the data or the information to maybe find a different edge, a different insight? And that's really how we've looked at that.
Excellent. One of the things that I think about that the tech industry has as a brand is embracing failure. This, fail often, it's a badge of honor, pride. And I would think that perhaps in sports, failure is not perceived necessarily the same way, certainly at the team level, but how have you experienced this notion of how you want your organization to think about failure, and do you have to think about it differently in the roles that you're currently in relative to the roles that you've been in to this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I'll chime in. I think at big companies, it's often, you have so many checkpoints that failure becomes something that's a little bit like you avoid at all costs. But what does that do? It limits the risk-taking and the autonomy you give teams. I've been in situations where we want to make a decision and you have 30 meetings before the meeting to actually have the decision, and then you're in the room and somebody else makes the decision, not you. And what's great about, I think, smaller companies is we all wear the same hat. Your title might be CEO or Chief Product Officer or whatever it might be, but you're rolling up your sleeves and you're talking support one day and you're doing some product insights and development the next day. And that's the difference. And so I think from a pure business operation standpoint, what what you should strive for and what to look for is the companies that give you the autonomy to make the decisions and not be afraid, because you will fail a million times. We've all done it, a million times each. And as long as you take the lessons and learn from that and apply it, and it's a psychologically safe environment that you're doing it in, you will excel much faster than the larger companies who want 30 or 40 checkpoints as you go through it.
And just to hop in there, I think just connect the last question with this question is, I think one of the things I learned during my career is like when I was at Google and Google was very small, like one day I had to go meet with Larry and Sergey about the ad strategy and what we were building for the ad system. And when I got there, they had an erector set and they were like, had little wrenches and they were, building like, and they were like, can you hold this? Can you do this? And they're like, open this book and flip the pages. And they had a camera with the lens taken off, pointed upside down that they put in the erector set. And while I was meeting with them, they were like, just turn the page. We talk about ads, turn the page. I said, what are we doing here, guys? It was like the ads meeting at Google. We need to make some decisions. And they're like, oh, we're figuring out whether or not we can take images and put them on Google. And it really was the beginning of Google Images. But that memory from mine is always burned in my mind, because the fact of the matter is the ads was growing really quickly. It was going to be the main thing in our IPO in terms of revenue. But they were still so interested in innovation about where we're going next. And they had an erector set and a camera they had taken the lens off of, and they had me in the meeting, which was supposed to be about ads, turning the pages and checking whether or not it was coming out. And I think that mentality is like in a smaller company and a founder being able to make those type of decisions is really important. And I think as a leader, it's important to like actually embrace, to actually celebrate that. And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot at Flowcode is, basically you make money with problems. You don't make money with good news. And we have a saying, our crew is right in the front here, the Flowcoders, is, basically you have to think about problems like a Big Mac, and you want to come in every day and chow, problems and deal with them really quickly. And the second piece is you have to give people, I think, the room to try things and innovate. And I think the best part about, I think, technology coming to sports is, sports is win or lose. You show up and it's like every week you win, you lose, you feel good or bad. I think the difference with tech that is coming into sports now is that you have an opportunity to, try, fail. And actually, like, failure in business is probably more important than winning. I don't think you end up winning in business until you fail like a huge amount of times. And I think we have a saying that we adopted from Japan, which is, problems are gifts. And we're like, you should give gifts out every day at work. And I think that mentality is very, very, very positive. It takes a little while for you to get used to, but like one thing, we had Danny Meyer, the famous restaurateur, in our office a couple of weeks ago, and he said something which is shine the sunlight on the culture you want to grow. And so one of the things we try to do, and I try to do a lot, is actually when someone fails at our office, and Slack has put out a note basically saying, like, this didn't work, but by the way, this was awesome. This was incredible, and I think as a leader you can do, and I learned that partially from Silicon Valley, but that's a big part of culture, I think, in business.
Yeah, I think the problem solving that you learn from big tech in terms of whether it's crawl, walk, run, like try something, iterate, and don't just go for the gold-plated thing right out of the gates. I think that's something that is different, right? It's like in sports, we know there is a problem. How are you going to go solve that problem? And you can't iterate in the same ways unless you're iterating week to week or snap to snap in football. But even in other sports, when we talk about like what's the risk reward, what I think culturally, though, we've really talked a lot about is, okay, how can we incrementally help? Maybe not everything we try is going to be helpful out of the gate, but I think if we're going to try a bunch of different things, we can find and we can innovate in how some of these pieces actually come together. And we had some discoveries like that where there was research that had been going on for 2 years, and there wasn't really clear how we would make money doing that. It wasn't really clear like what was the one thing it could do. But as we gave people that room to innovate and think through how we could leverage this data differently, what kind of insights it can find, there were so many new things that you were able to discover. I think that mindset shift is different, right? It's not just next week, next game. It's very much a longer term view. On the smaller company versus big company and that culture, I think the focus in one area is a really big difference from a big company. While the value of big companies, you get to try many different careers, many different hats, you don't have the same focus all the time. You have a lot of different customers, you have a lot of different industries. How do you get to just focus on one? And I know when I was at Microsoft, one of my favorites was anytime we were working with the NBA or the NFL or NHL. I'm like, man, I'd love to do this all day, every day. And now I get to, and like that's actually the really fun part, is being able to not have to context switch between this government and someone dying in healthcare, and then, like oil and gas, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, let's go talk about winning another game. Like, it's like, what's going on? So I think that's been really helpful for bringing also people that are extremely passionate about that same space. You have a very different culture.
So on that, let's build on that. When you think about this idea of we are nimble, we're fast growing, we're changing, we're experimenting, we're figuring it out. How do you think about balancing that, or what do you look for to think, are we being innovative and experimental versus we're drifting from our core mission or values and we're doing too much experimenting? How do you think about leading through that balance of experimentation versus sticking to our core?
Well, it's interesting. When we created the very first Xbox at Microsoft, for example, we took the Xbox org away from Microsoft. We literally rented another building off campus. You might remember this. And we were all in there. And to your point, I think this is important. The very first Xbox was just a PC motherboard. And we were like, how do we make a console? How do we compete? And it had Ethernet, RJ, all the things that a PC would have. And we were like, we don't know if we need this, but we just want to get this going. But it was a bunch of people in a room ideating off each other. And that Ethernet port ended up creating Xbox Live, which was the first time consoles would be able to connect the world together and play in the living room while you're talking to another person. So sometimes that innovation off these random meetings comes, you kind of trip over it and you embrace that. And then you reflect back and just think, wow, how did that actually happen? And we weren't afraid to say, we're going to add a $1 part for this, even though it's on PC, but we're going to connect the world. And it ended up, Xbox Live ended up becoming $1 billion business. The competitors then embraced it, and all of a sudden, that innovation came in full effect. So the Google discussion you had really resonates with a lot of things.
Yeah, I think the balance, at least for me, given that as a CEO, this is also a different responsibility, is making sure that we are still a business. We still have to manage our resources carefully. We still have to look at profitability. And as you said, you don't want to take the innovation away, but we all have to still be responsible. And so I find that there's different employees that are good at very different things. There's like this 0 to 1 group who love solving problems that have never been solved before. There's others who are really good at taking that solution and actually applying it to very specific problems. They're like, great, you can predict this, but how would a coach do that? How would a GM use that? And they are able to kind of personalize it down to the user. And then there are folks that are thinking about how do we scale this? How would I go do this in college where there's way more teams and way more games versus one team, one problem, one set of constraints? And so I think really getting to know your employees is a really, really critical part of how you run that organization, so you can understand both their strengths as well as their passion. And how you map that allows you to have space for innovation and folks who need to spend more time there versus others who are like, yeah, maybe I do 10% time in the innovation space, but I still want to have that room. I still want to have the ability to do that. It just doesn't have to be 90% of my job. And so I do think that's another big part.
It's interesting. I've been at companies where they say, we're going to have the innovation group, and they take 100 people off, and they're in this other boxed room doing innovation. I've never seen that work. Personally, I've never seen that work because they're not connected to the focus and prioritization in the company. I talk to the engineering leads, some of them are out here, and I say, what's the, 20, white space is a wonderful thing. Give people, don't book them 120%, book them 80, 85%, and give them the 20% to play around with the latest in technology, because the innovation will organically come from within the teams, in my opinion, 90+% of the time. And that's where, frankly, that's a retention mechanic because they get to have fun. They're not just working on their tasks day to day, but foster that collaboration and creativity within teams so that the innovation comes out of that. An engineer that owns something and feels personally responsible for it will drive that thing 7 days a week and will get it done at high quality. That's just, in my 20+ years here, I'm going to show my age, in my 20+ years here, that's always been true. And some of the best innovation at Microsoft, at Blizzard Entertainment, and at PrizePicks comes through that.
There one thing, just one piece of advice on this topic is, a lot of times people will say, especially at big companies, hey, we want to innovate, or we have to be okay with failure. They say these generic things. And one thing that's been helpful I've seen in the past is, when the US said they were going to the moon, they didn't say we're going to outer space. And I think if you choose let people know that, hey, we're going to go to the moon. We don't know how we're going to get there. We don't know which path it's going to take, but everyone has the same goal in mind, then I think it actually helps take all the innovation and brain power and at least point it. Maybe you end up at Jupiter, but if you have a planet to shoot at, it really does help, I think, take all that innovation energy, because people want to innovate. Humans are naturally growth inclined, but I think having a moon, or whatever your version of the moon is, to get people pointed at, then let the innovation bounce towards the moon versus bounce towards outer space. And I think bigger companies, there's a lot of bouncing towards outer space sometimes.
So, Mike, I have to say, as you were talking about this Xbox and the building off-site and everything, and I thought, when you were in there, did you know you were spawning a whole new series of negotiations between parents and children? Because I think about my 3 kids, that I think 80% of the conversations we have to have are relate to Xbox. How much money can I spend on Xbox? Can I talk to my friends?
Wait, let's get Jordan up here.
I know.
Your son's
Here he is, yeah. Yeah, Xbox. But I have my 13-year-old right now is the one who is angling very hard. So you're welcome. There you go. All right, so as a psychologist, something I've been wanting to talk about, and that is the concept of the fan or fandom. And so fan is a term, right? In another industry, we might say a user or a customer. And I think about this because we are, as a family, I'm not in the sports industry, but deep fans. My husband and I and all of our kids, so much so that I think my husband and I named all 3 of our kids after professional athletes. They all have Chicago athlete first names. They have Pittsburgh Steelers middle names. And I think, welcome to, here's Jordan Bradshaw right here in the front row. But I think about that, and I think I like retail too, but I didn't name my kids Gucci or Valentino, right? So is a fan a different term just an industry term for the end user, a client, a customer, a user? Or is there the psychology of the fan and how we have to understand the role of the fan in this industry a fundamentally different thing?
I'll tell one quick story from last night. I told you this story. We had our board meeting, Mike McMaster in the front, Flowcode was there yesterday, and I took the board out to dinner afterwards, and I asked them one question, which is, in the last 10 years, what's the most meaningful thing that you've changed your mind on that you thought you would never change your mind on in the last 10 years? And people went around the table, and it was like how I treat my kids, how I brought them up, these super meaningful, emotional things. And it got to one of the people on the team, and they said, I gave up my NFL team allegiance. And I thought he was, I said, oh, that's funny. He's like, no, I gave it up. and the whole table turned into a discussion about this person giving up their fandom for this NFL team compared to all the other people who talk about families and incredible multi-generational things. And it's that for me was like, that is fandom, that somebody at a dinner like that, who's in a professional setting, would normally probably not bring something up, but that's how deeply that person cares about the NFL teams. And I also said to Jonathan Kraft was speaking earlier, I'm a huge Patriots fan, and I think the Patriots monetize 10% of my interest. And I go to games, I bring my high school friends up every year, I take my son to games every year, but it's 10%. I think about the New England Patriots way more than they monetize me, and I think don't tell them that, but I think that fandom is a different, it's a religion.
And does that impact how you think about even your business?
That's the start of our business. We said we're going to be direct fans to brands, and I think the same way you talk about Valentino. I think there's other places in the world in people's lives that they have insanely deep fandom connections to, but most other industries don't think about their customers as fans. And I think that's a big mistake. And that's really why we built Flowcode, was to directly hook fans up to brands.
Yeah, I think you're asking, are they a user?
Yeah.
In the software world, we have users, we have personas. What kind of user are they? It is, we definitely think of it as a user type, but when we research, we do in our design team, we do usability research and trying to understand exactly what is the psychology of that user. And it's interesting because I think across age, it's different, across demographic in terms of socioeconomic demographic. When we look across the world, like when I talk to people in Europe about soccer or football, and they're like, well, this was my grandma's team. Like, this is why I love them, because I have memories of watching this game with my grandma. I think the shift to following players versus teams, it's still a fan. You're still a super fan. You're a LeBron fan. You're a Brady fan, whatever that may be. but you're kind of shifting your identity with them as they're kind of shifting between the various teams they are in. The depth of understanding of a fan is also very interesting. Like as part of our overall market segmentation, we look at the different types of fans, and the amount of knowledge that you have, even when entering betting, it's surprising, right? There's folks who just want to do it because, I want to beat my husband at fantasy this week, so I'm going to put in a little more money in. But then there are folks who are paying attention to every single detail of every OC and every call, and it's like they're part of the team. They're an extension of the team. And you're mentioning religion, like it is, like very much so. So it's a really wide range, and it's such a wide audience. There's folks who only watch the Super Bowl, and that's it. It's a social event now, right? And so there's a pretty, I wouldn't say that there's just one kind of fan. I think there's preferences of monetizable fans, which are slightly different. But I think that's what makes the sports so much more interesting and engaging, is you can connect with almost anyone at any level.
Yeah, you talk about player stats. It's one of the things I've learned the most. By the way, I've learned far more from the team than they've learned from me. And one of the things they've taught me is this: daily fantasy sports is a skill-based game, because these incredible players we have on our platform, they know every stat about everything. And I was at a dinner 2 weeks ago, and to your point, someone was debating Michael Jordan's the GOAT, LeBron James is the GOAT. And it started, casual, friendly. 30 minutes in, I thought they were going to be blows. Like, it was beyond just, a friendly debate. And I had to try to change the topic, but it kept coming back. Here's all the numbers and the stats. And at PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports lets us celebrate those incredible athletes and their stats, and to your point, make them more aware about these incredible accomplishments they have. And so I think fandom is continually evolving all the time. From team-based, I was like, are the 49ers going to win or not? Now it's all about particular people across many different teams. And it really resonated with me what you said. But it's an amazing opportunity to work. I thought video games had the most passionate people in the world. Like, if you do something, you nerf an Overwatch character, the hate you get on that is unbelievable. Sports fans in daily fantasy sports and their affinity for athletes is at the same level of passion and energy, and you love that because you love working at a place where you can feed off that energy. Amazing.
So we have Sports Analytics Conference. So I'm assuming most people here are united in love of those two things, sports and analytics. At the same time, psychologist in me says, hey, human beings don't always make decisions with data, and we have to influence people who have status quo bias. This is how we've always done it, so that feels right. Confirmation bias that fits with my hypotheses, my intuition of how it's supposed to be. So when you think about selling, being influential, either internally or externally, trying to be influential with data, but also recognizing these human factors, can you talk a little bit about maybe what's been challenging in that regard, and how you've thought about being data-driven to drive influence?
One of the things that I was lucky enough to learn when I was on the Power BI team is, like you said, human experience, your gut, is very, very strong. And a lot of the people who have gotten to the leadership roles that they're in is not necessarily based on data when data didn't exist back then. And so I think the hardest part when you're going into certain sports, and every sport is at a different level, I would say, is you have people who are experienced, who've had great success with the calls and the decisions that they made without having that data tool. And now you're trying to integrate into the ways that they make decisions, an additional tool, which, by the way, might counter their current opinion, right? It might make them look at the problem slightly differently. Like, maybe we were focusing, we were looking at the running back. We talk a lot about Saquon and the difference when he was on the Giants versus the Eagles. And it's like, well, it's the same player, so what was different? And let's start to look at everything around them and start to measure what was happening around them that led to that. And of course, there's a lot of opinions of exactly, was it the players, was it the coaching, there's so many things, and like you said, so many human factors. The way we've been discussing it is, how do we raise the waterline of your decision making? So not only do you get another point of view, you have a cross-check, you have another way to potentially look at a problem slightly differently, and that does take a little bit of an open mind to saying, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I'm gonna check. I'm gonna see if there is a different opinion, a different way of looking at the problem. And as long as that is brought in, I think, into an organization where it is a tool to aid you move forward, as opposed to, this is right, this is wrong. I think that's where data honestly becomes very contentious and almost fails to get the adoption that it could be used for, is when it comes across as, no, this whole group and all of these people who have been working in this industry and experts in this industry, we're just not gonna listen to that. We're just gonna listen to the data. And I think that is, like, that never works. It never worked in oil and gas, it never worked in healthcare, it's not gonna work in sports. And you're dealing with the best of the best, right? In a lot of these cases, especially in the pro leagues, it's a very useful tool, but you have to learn how to incorporate it and adopt it into your everyday practice.
I'll give you one thing on that topic, which I think is a danger, not just the sports industry, but across industries, is I think the data has become so powerful that it also is commoditizing a lot of thinking. And I think that, to your point about having the experts who you guys work with, who worked at the NFL, and you have hundreds of years of experience there with those people, one of the things, I had an outside partner call me like maybe 3 weeks ago, and they're like, hey, I know you spend a lot of time in ads and marketing and media and those things. Like, I can't, my team is just doing this one tactic over and over and over again. And I said, you pull their linked ups. So we were on Zoom. I just pull the people on your team, their linked ups on, and their LinkedIns, were all certified by the same data people, companies. And so I said, this person's certified by that, this person's certified by this. So I'm like, your entire team has been trained by other companies in the data and analytics business. And I asked him a question. I said, how much time do they spend with your direct customers? And he said, I don't know. I'm like, go ask. So he went and found out, like, basically it was almost zero. So, I think one of the things with data that's really powerful is, like, data is extremely powerful as long as you have access to the front end customers and you actually are doing it. I think some of the most innovative companies I've seen around the world actually have their offices open for their customers to be able to actually come in and meet with product managers, and kind of what you're doing with the NFL people. They're actually real users themselves. And I think that that's where I do think there's a issue of balancing right now data with the non-commoditized information from consumers. And I would say that's like probably a substantial danger for a lot of businesses right now. They've gotten so hooked just on the back end and haven't done what you've done, is bring the users actually into your office, which is powerful.
I mean, we have to basically convince our own employees, because half of our employees are ex-NFL staff, that like the data and the AI that our engineers are building are actually useful. And we say, if we can't convince our own employees, like, it's not going to be good enough for everyone else.
This is a question from the audience, but it's on this topic generally, so it's a good point to ask it, which is about readiness. So how do you assess the readiness of sports organizations to adopt new technologies? And what do you do to facilitate that adoption?
I mean, part of it is, you don't have time to say we're totally ready, because the pace is so fast. Like, talking about data, I've seen companies get so much data, they don't know what to do with it. And then decisions actually go slower on that. And so from a velocity standpoint, the sports industry changes every 10 minutes. You're looking at Twitter or whatever you're looking at, and all of a sudden something has happened across sports. And so I always encourage the teams to, to your point, go where their gut sometimes, but like, don't go so slow that you're waiting for validity all the time, because you'll be left behind. People are going to accelerate faster, and they're going to take risks, and they might fail or succeed, but the velocity has to be very, very high against that. And so I always encourage people to shoot from the hip sometimes. Not all the time, but like, you're there because you're great. And you're there because the business and the company has confidence you'll make the right decisions towards that. And that's really important.
One of the areas that we've looked at is value-based selling, right? And ideally, it's not even a sale. It's what are the problems you have and what's the value that we bring to the table. And when you go at it from that angle, you actually aren't talking about the tech as much. You're not talking about like this crazy model with trillions of data. It's like, yes, we know all of that, but that's not the important part. The important part is like, what are you gonna do better, faster, or cheaper? And how do you explain to the team that they can do these things by leveraging you as a partner or as a technology? I think that conversation shifts it from readiness to what are the most important things that you care about right now, and which of those hard problems can we help you solve? And every team is going to be different. Everyone's budget is different. Everyone's team size is different. Their care-abouts in terms of their run for playoffs is different. And so I think you have to be able to be agile to understand the needs of that particular customer, so then you can customize what offerings you have, what capabilities you have to those specific needs. Then it's ideally not as hard to, you're not pushing stuff onto them, right? It's like, oh, okay, I can see how I could use this. I can see how it would add value. And if there is a number that you can calculate, it makes it much easier. I save this many dollars. I think I can get this many, wins, or whatever the amount is that you're calculating. But I think that really resonates with a lot of customers.
You know what's interesting is the companies have had all this data historically, and they're figuring out how to use it a lot. We're on the verge of everybody having all of this data. And so if you think about the DFS or the OSB, sports betting business and industry, all of a sudden the users are going to be so empowered with easier models and using the data, and the business might flip upside down overnight. And that's something that we're thinking about very carefully. Of no longer do we, or the companies, the ones that know everything that's going on. Pretty soon, the average person playing your game or sport or whatever every single day is going to have just as much, if not more, data in public. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Totally.
Absolutely. So global expansion, another question that came in. Do you, or how do you envision your organization expanding globally? And is there, how do you think about technology in that process?
We do a lot of stuff at the Olympics, so I will. One truism I think we know is that fandom is boundaryless in terms of country, and I think also the fact of the matter, and I think this is partly driven by a lot of the money going into sports and the expansion capabilities, but I think you've also seen obviously private equity, the leagues in the U.S., the leagues internationally coming into the F1 coming into the United States in a big way. So I think if you go forward 10, 15 years. I don't think it's going to be surprising to see the like Olympics type competition for all the sports across all nations, and I think the opportunity there is that being able to segment and understand your customer base. Like if I were an NFL owner right now and I had a region out in the world that I got assigned to, or a country, I think having done global businesses before, every region is slightly differently. The fans, they may be a fan of your team or your business, but the reality is that localizing it really well is critical, and I think that it'd be hard to think international in sports is not going to be probably as big as sports betting in terms of the growth opportunity. I don't know if you agree with that, but
yeah, I do. I think leagues are showing it. There's more international games now. If you looked at profile of the NBA today versus 20 years ago, it was largely United States players. Now it's international players, some of the biggest stars. And so I have no doubt in my mind that companies are going to, if you're embracing sports, companies are going to have a global perspective, because the leagues will lead us there. And the more we can help and work with the leagues to make that happen, I think it's better for everybody. But to your point, you watch football games internationally, and you see some of the most passionate, incredible fans. The international capability of that is, in many ways, in the sports arena, they're leading the United States. It's not the United States is leading the world, and so you got to look at it more holistically for sure, else I think your business is going to be left behind.
So another audience question, and Tim, I'll start with you because I think this is definitely something that you think about, is how can sports teams and leagues leverage tech to create new revenue streams beyond ticketing and sponsorship?
Yeah, I think that this is what we were talking about a little bit before the panel. Was, I think the under monetization of the fan, I think it starts, and I'll just off the top of my head, I'll give you some examples. Like if you had another business where you had, 40,000 people outside of your stadium for 3 hours before a game, you'd probably do more services in that area, which is the parking lot. And if you go through sports, there are massive amounts of buckets of time and energy that sports fans are putting into things. And I'll give you another example. Most of the people who are big sports fans read about their teams every day, or they interact with the teams, or they're doing daily fantasy, things like that. The people don't think about their fans as members. So if I said instead of having fans, you had members, and you were like, what do the members do all day? And you started going through their day and picking things off. I think if you look at sports, there's an ecosystem around it that's picking things off in terms of value creation. But if you're a sports league or a sports team, the hub and spoke model is there's a lot of value sitting on the table. And sports is one of the places, just because it wasn't the first industry to pick tech up as quickly. It is now picking up quickly, but I think if you zoom back and say, hey, I have a member, where does that member interact with me, and what are the value add things I could do for that member, and what data do I have on their membership and where they interact with things? There's a lot of things from build a business in the parking lots where you have 40,000 people waiting for 2 hours for a game. There's also, using content as a unique asset that you could release. Like you were showing me your app backstage, which was incredible. And I was asking you, like, are people using this for sports betting things? Like releasing, if I were a team, I'd come to you and say, hey, give me some of that data. I'm going to release before the game starts just for my members. And they would probably pay, for the Patriots, I would probably pay like $10 a game to look at unique data that I couldn't get anywhere else. And the Patriots could sell it to me directly. And so I think there's a huge amount of pockets in sports that could be monetized with high value things, not low value things, high value.
I was able to work with F1 and McLaren in my last job at WebEx. And one of the things that we enabled for them is fans being able to connect directly with the drivers as well as in the pit. And while we see a lot in, I would say, Netflix and like from a viewer standpoint of that back door, whatever back office it is, the real-time nature of being able to hear and see what's going on in the pit created this craze, right? So first it was the Drive to Survive, and now it's like more and more engaging experiences for the fan. It created a complete change in their brand. And it wasn't just merch, it was all the things surrounding them, from share of voice and search and recognizability, as well as like, what does it mean to be a McLaren fan? Like now they're trying to identify their identity. They're trying to figure out what that means. And so as you said, there's so much opportunity here. And all of it is not necessarily even just monetization, but there's an engagement level that is very different. Like how many times are you touching that fan throughout the week between games? And what are the tidbits of information that make me feel kind of special, that you're letting me into some secrets that others aren't? I think there's a ton of that's available. It will take, I would say, the leagues also being much more open to that. Like that's one of the other big things is how much is too much, because you can't get your secrets out there, but at the same time, you want to create these fans for life.
Yeah.
And that attachment creation, I think, is very possible.
So I'm going to see if we can get 2 more questions in. I will just say, I'm not your professor, but as a professor, these questions are A+. I'm really liking them. And this one came in, and this is something I think about a lot, which is, like, how could I convince my leadership team, boss, et cetera, to leverage and use data coming out of what you guys were just talking about when it's captured? We have it, but our company has it, but we're not fully relying on it. So I have to be influential internally to convince senior leaders to actually be more data-driven. It's a really interesting question as people come up in their organizations, that you may not be the prototypical leader who would have resistance to that, but how do you think about what would be a compelling argument that somebody could make, try to get their leadership to utilize that data better?
I'll be very practical on this one. I think accessibility. Like there's times where data is so hard to understand or access, and you have to go through 15 logins, and you get this page, and you send 30 emails saying, what does this even mean? That's what I think just 5 years ago made data very complex to be used throughout, embedded in the organization. The other thing that I think has blocked a lot is, there was a time where data was power. The more you knew, the more you thought you were more important. And that created a culture and a behavior of not sharing data. Some of the best companies in the world had this intrinsic problem of not having information flow because of the wrong motivations and the wrong reasons. And so at PrizePicks, one of the things our great VP of data does is he has these dashboards that go out, and they're in Slack and they're in email, and they're very simple, and it takes such complex models in the back, and they just present it in a way that anybody could look at that and go, something's not right here, or something is right. How do we go double down and accelerate and innovate even more in that area? So accessibility for me is by far the biggest thing, making it simple. And if you all have the data and you know it's valuable and it's not being used, I would challenge all of you to say, how are we making it easier to be consumed by every single individual in the company?
Yeah, consumption and I would say cognitive load for consuming data is very high. Right? If you're designing any end user experience, whether it's backed by data or not, cognitive load is real. Like I look at it and I'm like, I don't know where to start. Like there's a cold start problem. There's so many things like that. And as you were mentioning, not just ease of not 15 logins, which is obviously a problem, ease because of security. Can I use it, when I'm outside of the office? Can I use it on my phone? So that kind of accessibility. And then I think it's going from just data to what's the actual insight and what different decision can I make because of this insight? So you really have to boil it down to how is this gonna change the way that I behave, and how is it helping me behave better in the set of things and activities that I do in a day? I think that's really important. Data visualization is a tool that I don't think is leveraged enough. You mentioned the dashboards. You can quickly look at a dashboard and I know exactly what I'm looking at, right? Whether it's the uptime of a service or an anomaly that I found in data, which then led me to finding something else. How do you get to the insights faster with that data? And how do you present that in a way where even if I spend a couple minutes a day, I'm getting value? And I'm not having to sort through understanding the model or where the data is and whether it's clean. And there's just so many problems there. Nobody wants the problem. Maybe your team wants the problems, but some folks are definitely like, no, just give me the answer, right? And not only give me the answer, give me confidence that I can trust this answer. So that I think is also really
I'll give you one tactic. I call it the invisible hand, which is if you want your boss or someone to become data centric, I would put together a presentation that's going to get them promoted. I would think about whether or not I'm going to do such great analytics and insights that it's going to help this person get promoted, and I wouldn't put your name on it. I do a presentation, I would send it to them and be like, hey, I thought this might be helpful for you. I've done that so many times in the last 30 years, and I've seen the presentation I did with the other person's name on it, presented at a gazillion meetings. Is a great sales tactic but if you go into thinking you want to have someone change their behavior towards data, there's two ways to do it. You can either go to them and try to pound home, or do their work that they should be doing, put it in a presentation, invisible, hand it to them, and I guarantee you'll see a behavior change. But you got to go into it with that type of mentality.
Okay, and that is a brilliant place in which we will end. 100% agree. Amazing. Thank you to all of you. This was absolutely amazing. I could talk to you for days, but thank you very much.